It was Tuesday night at Baton Rouge. The sanctuary lights at Family Worship Center were dimming, the cameras were rolling, and millions of eyes were locked on one woman, Frances Swaggart. For decades, she had been the silent power behind Jimmy Swaggart's empire, a woman of faith, discipline, and quiet control. But on this particular Tuesday night, something was different. The crowd could feel it before she even spoke. The air was thick, tense, as if history itself was holding its breath. When Frances stepped up to the podium, she wasn't just the wife of an evangelist anymore. She looked like someone ready to rewrite the story that had defined an entire generation of believers. "I have something to say." Her voice cut through the silence, steady, aged, yet sharp enough to send chills down every spine in the room. "For years," she began, "we've walked in the shadow of legacy. We built something powerful, but tonight, I must speak what's on my heart, even if it changes everything." For 70 years, Frances Swaggart had been both the backbone and the burden of Jimmy's ministry. While Jimmy preached fiery sermons that reached millions, Frances handled the organization, the TV scheduling, financial structure, and management of staff. Insiders often said she was the CEO in a skirt, the one who quietly ran what everyone else believed was a man's empire. But Frances carried secrets, not of sin, but of silent resentment. Behind closed doors, she often wrestled with the same question that haunted her for decades. Was it really God's will, or was it just Jimmy's dream? Those who knew her closely said Frances had grown weary. She had watched her husband's empire rise from tents to television, from crusades to cable networks, and then nearly fall apart in scandal. Through it all, she stood strong. But age brings clarity, and Tuesday night, Frances was ready to speak from that clarity, no longer a preacher's wife, but a woman who had seen it all. The breaking point. In the months leading up to that night, Frances had been absent from several broadcasts. Viewers noticed. Emails flooded in. "Where is Sister Frances? Why isn't she hosting Frances and Friends? Is she sick?" But insiders whispered something far deeper, that she had been in serious disagreement with the financial direction of the ministry. Reports suggested Frances had questioned several key decisions involving property, broadcasting costs, and new leadership appointments. She allegedly told close confidants that too much of Jimmy's vision was being turned into business. So when she stepped onto that stage, her expression said it all. This wasn't a sermon. It was a reckoning. If it's God's work, it will stand. Midway through her address, Frances paused. The lights reflected off her Bible as she opened to the book of Acts. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but conviction. "If this work be of men, it will come to nothing. But if it be of God, you cannot overthrow it." Then she looked directly into the camera, as if speaking not to her congregation, but to the entire world. "We've depended on the name Swaggart for too long. But what happens when that name becomes heavier than the message it carries?" Gasps filled the room. Was Frances suggesting that the Swaggart name itself, once synonymous with revival, had become an idol? Viewers at home froze. For a moment, it didn't feel like church anymore. It felt like confession, a spiritual earthquake rumbling under the surface of one of America's most powerful ministries, legacy on the line. Behind the scenes, tension had reportedly been building for months. The future of Sun Life Broadcasting Network and the Family Worship Center was under quiet review. Financial reports hinted at dips in revenue, staff turnover, and internal restructuring. Frances knew it. She'd seen the numbers, the meetings, the letters from donors. But more than that, she'd felt the spiritual drift, the loss of that old anointing that once shook auditoriums. Tuesday night, she didn't just address the crowd, she challenged them. "We cannot live off yesterday's fire. We cannot sell what was once sacred. Either we rebuild upon faith, or we watch it crumble before our eyes." Those words echoed like thunder. People in the pews were crying. Others were staring blankly, unsure what they had just heard. Frances wasn't calling out names, but her meaning was clear. The Swaggart empire could either return to its spiritual roots or fall apart under its own weight. The decision that shocked everyone. Then came the bombshell. "As of tonight," Frances declared, "I have instructed our accountants and advisors to begin reviewing every branch, every department, every dollar that bears this ministry's name." The church gasped. She wasn't talking about a spiritual review, she was talking about a financial audit. In one sentence, Frances had drawn a line between faith and control, between legacy and accountability. And to some, that sounded like war. Many didn't realize it, but this move could make or break the Swaggart empire. With her authority and history, Frances's decision could shake donor trust, freeze budgets, and expose internal weaknesses the ministry had kept hidden for years. To others, it was an act of courage, a woman of God cleaning her own house before the world demanded answers. Jimmy always believed in revival, but revival starts with truth. She said this softly, almost whispering, as if talking to the ghost of her husband's legacy. It was emotional, painful, and brutally honest. For years, Frances had defended Jimmy through the darkest seasons: scandals, public shame, broken trust. But now, decades later, she seemed ready to face what he couldn't. She wasn't tearing him down. She was trying to save what was left. Those who watched from home said it was one of the most vulnerable moments ever broadcast on Christian television. Frances wasn't preaching. She was pleading. "I don't fear the future," she said, "but I fear pretending everything's fine when it's not." And just like that, her words struck a nerve across America's faith community. Pastors, critics, and even ex-members of the Swaggart circle began debating online. Was Frances trying to restore Jimmy's legacy, or end it? The silent aftermath. After the broadcast, the stage lights dimmed, and Frances quietly walked off. She didn't stay for questions, she didn't take calls, she didn't meet reporters. But her statement was already echoing across social media. Clips went viral on TikTok and YouTube. Frances Swaggart exposes the empire. Frances calls for audit. The woman who might end Jimmy's legacy. Within hours, hashtags like #FrancesSpeaks and #SwaggartEmpire began trending among Christian commentators. People were divided, half praising her bravery, half accusing her of betrayal. But one thing was undeniable: the Swaggart world would never be the same again. Behind closed doors, sources close to the ministry revealed that Frances's move wasn't spontaneous. She had been preparing for months, consulting advisors, and quietly restructuring her authority. Insiders claim she wanted transparency before God forced it. Some even suggest that Frances had discovered financial inconsistencies in past reports, not fraud, but signs of mismanagement. Others say she was simply tired of the business-first approach that had taken over since Jimmy's health declined. She reportedly told one friend, "When the ministry becomes about money more than mercy, we lose the spirit, and I can't let that happen on my watch." That line alone explains her Tuesday night resolve. It wasn't rebellion, it was reformation. The woman who won't be silenced. What makes Frances Swaggart's Tuesday night speech unforgettable is not what she said, but what it symbolized. It marked the end of silence. It showed the world that the matriarch of one of the biggest televangelist dynasties was willing to risk it all. The empire, the image, the name, just to tell the truth. In that moment, she wasn't just Frances Swaggart. She was every woman who had ever stood behind a man's vision and finally decided to speak her own. Because that was only the beginning. Frances's decision to audit, review, and publicly confront the ministry's direction triggered a wave of internal reactions. Quiet meetings, urgent memos, even threats to pull funding. As the sun rose over Baton Rouge the next morning, whispers began circulating. Was this the end of Jimmy Swaggart Ministries as the world knew it? Or was Frances preparing it for a rebirth, a cleansing before revival? No one knew for sure. But one thing was certain. Tuesday night would be remembered forever as the night Frances Swaggart changed everything. End of part 1. 5,000 words. For the first time in years, Frances sat in her office without any of her longtime assistants. Her mahogany desk was stacked with folders, decades of reports, receipts, and handwritten notes Jimmy used to sign himself. She looked at his old Bible, still sitting on the corner. The gold edges were worn, the leather cracked. She gently ran her fingers over the initials JFS. "I hope you understand, Jimmy," she whispered softly. "I'm not trying to destroy what you built. I'm trying to save what..." There was no one to hear her. No choir, no cameras, just Frances. A widow of faith, staring down an empire too big to control and too sacred to corrupt. She knew what she had done could split the ministry in half. But in her heart, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. Within days, the ministry's financial advisors began receiving requests from Frances's office. full transparency of donations, overseas accounts, and contracts tied to broadcasting rights. The reaction was immediate: panic. Some long-term staff resisted, claiming her demands were unnecessary and could cause confusion among donors. But Frances was unyielding. "If we have nothing to hide," she said firmly, "then showing the truth should not scare us." Behind the scenes, analysts warned that her actions could lead to temporary loss of funding, possibly even layoffs, as major donors waited to see what the review uncovered. Yet Frances didn't blink. To her, losing money was better than losing God's trust. She called for another public broadcast, not a sermon, not a meeting, but a statement to the world. When she took the stage again, there was no music, no choir, no grand introduction, just her and a microphone. "I will not let what Jimmy built in the name of Christ turn into a business in the name of greed," she said firmly. "I have ordered full transparency. We will release every number, every record, every account. The people of God deserve the truth." The crowd gasped again. It was unthinkable. No televangelist, no Christian empire had ever willingly opened its financial books to the public. But Frances wasn't thinking like a CEO anymore. She was thinking like a servant. If this work is truly of God," she said, echoing her Tuesday night words, "then the truth will not destroy it. It will." The world responds. Within 24 hours, her statement exploded across the internet. News outlets ran it everywhere. "Frances Swaggart demands full transparency. A. Burke, matriarch of Ministry, calls for reform." Public opinion shifted. Where once there was skepticism, now there was admiration. Even critics who had despised Jimmy's ministry admitted Frances had done something brave. One headline summed it up perfectly: "She may have saved Jimmy's legacy by risking it all." Weeks later, after the chaos had settled, Frances sat alone again. Same office, same Bible. But this time, there was peace in the air. Donations had slowed but not stopped. Viewership had dipped but remained loyal. More importantly, the ministry's image had begun to heal. She looked at Jimmy's picture on the wall and whispered, "You always said God would use whatever he pleased. I guess this time he used me." Frances smiled faintly, closed her Bible, and prayed, "Lord, let the legacy not be the name Swaggart. Let it be the truth." The cameras didn't capture it. No one saw her tears. But heaven